Welcome to the Pro Design Builder podcast, a show where professionals and entrepreneurs share their stories, strategies, and secrets to building a thriving business and a successful life. I'm Sam, your host, as we dive deep into the world of life experiences and entrepreneurship. Before we get started, I'd just like to thank our sponsors, the Pro Design Builder. It's not just about building a business, it's about building a vision and a life that by design. The Pro Design Builder is a coaching and consulting firm for real estate investors who want to build spec homes and multifamily units. Reach out to us if you ever have the itch to do so. Also, we're having a house flipping 101 boot camp April 16th and 17th. We're going to be covering all sorts of strategies when it comes to creative finance, wholesaling, flipping, etc. That's April 16th and 17th in Fort Lauderdale. Also, foster care is near and dear to my heart. The mission for foster care is never over. I've fostered a number of kids. I've adopted 2 kids. I'm currently fostering now. If you ever feel led to give to our foster care initiative, there'll be a link in the description where you can donate right there. Okay? Without further ado, I have a guest that I've had on previously and had great reviews about, which is Donald Dye, which is a wealth strategist and an international best-selling author, is back on with us today. How you doing?
Good to see you again, Sam.
Yeah. So I don't know if other people caught the last time that you were here, so I just want to give them just a little refresher on who you are, what you do, and how you do it. So
awesome. Well, I received this yearning, this vision in 2020, went online right after that, and did what I was doing before for like now over 3 decades, just helping people in their finance, their personal finance. And now we have a movement. It's called Wisdom Wealth Impact Makers. And we're basically getting people to understand that everyone has the ability to get or create wealth. Get to a first $1 million within just a couple of years if you understand the concepts behind and the principles behind actually how money is used as a resource to advance your calling, your purpose in life, and using that to that you can get there quicker and leave a legacy behind for generations to come. So that's now our movement. It's been in place for the last few years. We're in over 26 countries, just helping people clear their financial path and understanding the bigger numbers, not just the smaller numbers of just bringing in income, but actually creating wealth. And that's like over $1 million in just a couple of years.
No, fantastic. I remember the first time you came on, I had a friend reach out to me. He was like, "Hey, I just saw Donald, and I gained a lot of nuggets from, when you had him on. There was a lot of fruit that was being gained there. So, when I reached back out to you, I was like, hey, let's hop on again. But this time we're going to just be focusing less on, the background, because you kind of gave us that, and more on planning, wealth strategy, wealth creation. So this is going to be jam-packed with, a whole bunch of knowledge and lessons learned and real strategy when it comes to building wealth. So you ready to dive in?
Yes, sir. That sounds good. I love this topic.
All right, good. So I'm going to start with my first question is, what's your overall philosophy when it comes to building and preserving wealth?
So this is kind of interesting because I learned it through a series of experience when I lost all my money gambling in Vegas. I think I talked about that last time. And so I learned it first from like the book context and then actually doing it, and I kind of landed in it. So my perspective is very different now compared to a lot of people, both online, but also financial advisors under that label, financial advisors, the people that are series certified, because I call it the 80% of the population. They tend to go down the road that everyone is serving them in this direction, but the challenge is that it's in the same path. So the 10% at the top, top 10%, just really look at it very differently. And I heard this a few years ago where you can take all of the money, all of the wealth in the world, and if you redistribute it evenly across the entire population of the world, not just one country, the world, it's only a matter of time before it all comes back to the top 3%.
Yeah,
And that's
I've
really
heard
because
that.
of the habits, the principles associated with it. So when we get to the word preservation, is very different for someone like me versus I think the way a lot of people will hear it. So and I have some very good friends. I got some clients that are financial advisors. So they're just different perspectives. But in preservation, just like in diversity, diversifying your portfolio, I believe it's actually, from my personal experience in working with people at the same time and confirmed with people that are really more billionaires, right? So people that are just like really big numbers, is that, diversification in the beginning is in the wrong stage, and then preservation in the beginning is in the wrong stage. Preservation really should be in the backstage of your process, and the reason why is that it's the same logic as protection. So when I hear a lot of people now talk about protect first, which there's nothing wrong with that, right? So, but that's an 80% mindset. And the reason why is because if you have nothing to protect, if you got no wealth, if you got nothing to be sued for, if you don't own anything, you have nothing to protect, right? So,
Correct.
so you have to build first, and then what happens is preservation's on the back end. So preserving in the beginning is very inefficient when you're trying to build wealth. But in the concept of preservation, it's also very different in the way I teach it with my movement because of the way money works. So where the general population will look at preservation as protect your money, it's really more, if you're under, like, the concept I teach is wealth triangle, which basically means that all of your money's coming from money that's made by your money. So when you do that, you're not really preserving anything because the money's never coming from you. It's always being generated by the money that you've already made. So your earned money is put not into paying your expenses, but your earned money, which is what everyone works for, is basically put into an asset, and then you're living off of what that asset actually produces. And that means that there's a lot of misconception about residual income and passive income on top of that. So if your hands are in it, if it's involved in it, and even though you're receiving it, it's still earned income. You're still doing something for it. So when you're talking about, in the concept of the wealth triangle, that means you sleep and your money is growing. I think Warren Buffett said it best. He said, if someone doesn't learn how to make money while they sleep, they're going to be working, for life. And that's really the concept behind it. So you really are not preserving when you're on the back end of the process, because you don't need to. Everything is just it's coming in regardless of whether you do or you don't. So it's not relevant, basically, from that perspective. So I don't know if that makes sense from a.
No, that makes perfect sense. To me, it may not make perfect sense to other people, but through time and learning and understanding about some of the concepts that you teach, it will make more sense to them. So, the other question I have for you is, how do you approach wealth management for entrepreneurs and business owners differently than a W-2 employee?
Yeah. So the first thing on that one, and I was talking to my members about this, so a lot of things are loosely used on the information age that we're in, and also on the online space, or some people call social media. It's very loosely used, and so what I mean by that is everyone's an entrepreneur. But an entrepreneur doesn't necessarily mean the same thing as a business owner or a small business owner. An entrepreneur, to me, is very specific. So you're basically starting and building businesses, but that's very specific to the words of businesses. So a lot of people, they're actually an entrepreneur by label, but they're just creating a job for themselves, which are two different things. So an entrepreneur is basically someone that's starting a business, and there's an actual business. So if a person is in a business that they started, and they're, if you take whatever they're taking out of the business as a salary or draw, then and there's no one else there, and if if something happened and they stopped working in it and it doesn't survive, means it's dependent on them, it's not really a business. It's actually more of a solopreneur rather than entrepreneur. And that's the first very big distinction, is that. So now, if I assume that to be the case with the majority of people, then what happens is that the question is, what's the biggest mistakes? The biggest mistakes is that entrepreneurs are really not building a business. They're basically building another job. Mm-hmm. And so whether they're forced to do it because they got laid off, they have a desire or a heart to start something, it still, is it a business or is it another job? Then from there, whether it is or it's not, the biggest money mistake I see people do is they, in big business, we call it capital funding. So you basically, or some people call it venture capital, where there's we call it an infusion of money right up front to start it. In my opinion, and also a few people like Mark Cuban, it's not the way you want to start a business. And the reason why is because you haven't proven anything yet. So you're putting in money that's automatically a hit or miss, and you never use money that way. You never use resources that way. So money is all intentional if you see it that way. So you're telling it what to do before you get it. But if you have no intent with it, then you don't have a plan, like a business plan, then the biggest problem is that you're literally just like playing roulette or craps on the craps table in Vegas, like I did with real money. That's all that is. So when we look at it from a perspective, that the second big mistake that people make is that they are putting money in to start a business that they don't need to, right? So and you want to start it with no money down, just like in real estate, you want to do real estate with no money down. So wherever you can leverage is what you want to do. And then the third biggest mistake that I see, and I see this not as much, but I'm sure if I asked the questions, it would be pretty prevalent, which is people start a business and they don't have a business plan. So there's just, people talk about, they have an idea, but that's not a business plan. That's just, a concept of what the business should do, but there's no details behind it. So automatically you're up for like a hit or miss, depending on the economy, the people, depending on everything else. And then the byproduct is that people hang on too long because they don't really have a plan to check if they're making progress.
No, that makes sense. I mean, I think back to myself as a young business person, and it probably took me three businesses in before I wrote my first business plan. Now, every business, after the first did better than before, but when you have a clear mapped out plan, you just look at the plan for direction, right? There's no more scrambling to find ideas. You know exactly what it needs to look like. You spent the time. So having that business plan is extremely important. So, another question I got for you is, what are some of the most common mistakes you see high net worth individuals make with their wealth strategy?
So that one's interesting. So I'll give you my mistakes, and then I've seen this with people that I've worked with that are multimillionaires, and so we generally follow the same steps in the early stages, right? So the one I made, which I see a lot of people make, is that you start making money, and then you get. Now I look at it and I say you get a little sloppy, right? You get really distracted. Because you kind of think you figured it out, right? So you think you figured it out, and so you start to try a lot of things, which kind of goes back to now principles of like diversification. You don't want to diversify in the beginning until you have millions of dollars, and then in our movement, it's like at least get to the first million, right? So then anything excess to that, then you can basically see if you want to do something with that. But if you learn that journey to the first million, effectively, you're probably going to choose not to waste the money over it, right? So then you're going to multiply it, even faster. But the biggest mistake I made, and I see a lot of people make, is that in the beginning, when you start making money, and especially in real estate, right? So real estate, I've played in 3 of the 4 asset classes, and then I have one. The last asset class is commodities, and that one I do a little bit in, but it's too slow for wealth creation, so I don't really do a lot in that. But in the other 3, it was very similar, right? It didn't matter which one it was. You kind of get, you kind of get overconfident, and then it's like, oh, I made that. So instead of continuing and really going from like the concept of good to great by Jim Collins in a business, instead of going to like the next level, we start to get really overconfident, over arrogant, like I did, big head. And all of a sudden it's like, I'm going to try this one. I'm going to try this. I'm going to try this. I'm going to try this. Right. And okay, it's fine because I made money here. I'm going to do it here. So that's the biggest mistake I see that I made, that I see a lot of people make. The next one I see people make when they are already in the high net worth is they become complacent. So it's kind of like I wanted to retire at 40. I set that goal at 27. And so when I left the corporate world, I had millions and millions of dollars coming in every single month or every single year. And I had left. And when that happened, then my whole intent was, I'm just going to coast through life. Like, I'm just like, I worked my butt off. I've done all this and I'm just going to coast. And so we become complacent, which was very difficult for me because I realized that it's kind of like, it was very self-defeating emotionally and psychologically. And so the next mistake I see people make that have made millions of dollars is they become complacent. Right. So, and that's okay, but that doesn't serve a bigger purpose. Like why are you even living? What's your actual purpose? What's your calling? Like why, you here for yourself, for your kids, for maybe you don't have a family, for other people, like, or are you just here to like, live? And what does that mean? So that's the second one. And then the third one that I see, and probably the second and the third are about the same, is that, a lot of people that have, let's just say, probably over $1 million, which is really nothing, right? So like $1 million is just a starting point. But a lot of the 80% feel like $1 million is a lot. And statistically speaking, most people are probably 99.9% of the people are not going to get, and leave this world with $1 million in their bank account. So that's actually the general population. But the third mistake I see people make is that, they're where they have their millions in, it's usually in one, and it's usually one asset class, and it's usually in the paper assets. And in the paper assets, that would be for people in the US especially, and I believe some of the other countries, it's mostly in like a retirement account. In US is very prevalent in that. And what people haven't seen is when the market corrects. And that just means that, what you have, I've known people that had like several $1 million and literally a correction. April 2000, I think, was the first one in the stock market after the .com. And then you have the real estate one. That was actually one of the real estate asset class. We've had like other corrections through there, and there's slight corrections. I've seen people many times have several millions of dollars and be like less than probably, a few $1,000s left. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's very, because they're highly dependent on like one area. So again, there's diversification by stage, which is not in the beginning, but when you get to a certain point, you want to make sure that you're secure in a couple of different areas. But more importantly, if you're doing like something like the wealth triangle, your money's not dependent on that. And what they had is really more of, they're getting the money from in a bucket like the paper assets that's literally based on like the economy. And that dependency is a risk.
No, for sure. I mean, there's so many things that you said that I absolutely relate with. Try a lot of things, the biggest mistake, so I think part of it is as a as an entrepreneur, you get this shiny object syndrome, right? And sometimes you get bored with the thing that is actually working, right? And you want to go conquer something else. And I could see that being a really big mistake because it requires a lot of energy to launch something new. So, and then a lot of entrepreneurs are not calculating, that fact. And then it also, what it does too is it distracts you from the main thing. Right. So everything that you are describing makes perfect sense to me, and completely relatable as to, why some of these mistakes, would happen. So how do you tailor wealth building to fit individual goals and risk tolerance?
So say that one more time. Let me make sure I
So
understand.
how do you tailor wealth building strategies to fit individual goals and risk tolerance?
Okay, there's three pieces I hear in that one: wealth building,
Yep.
and then goals, and then tolerance. So I'm going to kind of separate those by definition first, in
Okay.
the way I view it, and then I'll pull it together.
All
So
right. No problem.
so wealth building, in the way I define it, is basically, let's see here. Yeah, so wealth building is basically when you're building. Net worth. So I call it, just for people that are in the financial world, like whether it's finance or accounting. There's the balance sheet and income statement on personal finance, and so the balance sheet is where wealth is created. The income statement is where we survive off of, and the income statement is I call it the right side. The income statement is where most people live, and the income statement derives the budget. So whenever someone says budget, like Dave Ramsey, Susie Orman, a lot of the churches go towards like the budget. That's serving the majority of the people, because the majority of the people need to hear that, because they don't budget, right? But budgeting keeps you in the 80%. Budgeting actually doesn't build wealth. And so that's a big misconception. So when we talk about wealth building, we're talking about the balance sheet. And the balance sheet is where your net worth is growing, regardless of what you do. And that only happens if you have assets, and you have real assets, not, like just businesses that are not really assets. So it's really by definition of assets. And this is where we start to, like, this question starts to get into like financial education versus financial literacy, what's taught in the universities and degrees, and then the actual application of building wealth. So wealth building to me is building your net worth. So our movement is about first $1 million in net worth within the first several years, right? So that's very simple to get there, right? And then the journey to that is very different than when you get above $1 million, try to get to 2. There's a couple different breakpoints, 2, 5, 10. So those are the first several breakpoints. So that's the wealth building side. Now, the second part is relative to goals. So let me just kind of say, goals I define differently. So I think goals is the middle level. I think the higher level is vision. So and for people that are believers, in the Bible it says, like, people don't have vision, basically perish, right? So people don't have vision, perish. So a vision is the higher level. It's basically the further out that you go, that you can see what is it that you're trying to get to, is the first highest level, and then from there you're setting goals to get there. So the goals are then compartmentalized into, I do like 5 different areas is the way I learned it. So you have the goals there. So that's the how I define goals, which is a subset of the actual bigger picture, the vision. The third one is where you mentioned, how do these three relate? The third one I would probably put in the category of risk. So I'm going to kind of define it from that perspective, because that's probably a better way to look at it, from, I think, the context of your question. So the question is really more, how do you build wealth and then minimize risk, from a perspective. So I would define the third one more towards the concept of risk, and that's a very misinterpreted word, and a lot of people that are I don't know if I want to use the word successful or wealthy, but people that kind of understand the journey. Risk is a state of mind, and then there's the actual mathematics when you're talking about money, about like how high is your risk or low is your risk. But most people that are wealthy will probably agree with the statement. So what most people in the 80% perceive as risky is actually less risky. A good example of that is mortgages. So a lot of people don't want to have mortgages because they feel like if they buy a house, they're told by everyone, and I'm sure there's people here that's gonna debate this with me, but that's in the mortgage side that'll say put down 20%. You don't have
Hmm.
mortgage insurance, you have a lower monthly income, but when you're talking about money risk, you have 20% for like a $350,000 house. That's like $70,000 that is at risk. So what happens is that if the market corrects, the real estate market, and your $350,000 house just went down to 300, you literally lost $50,000. But when you're fully leveraged, then you have like you take 100% loan, you have a back-to-back loan, or you have an owner carry and then a loan. Then you have no money in it. So your risk is actually less, number one. Number two, if the market goes down, it's a $350,000 house, and you only have you have all of that mortgage. If it goes down to 300,000, you didn't lose any money because it's all in a loan. So what you could do is just give it back to the bank. You can do a deed in lieu of foreclosure. It's it's called. You can walk away from it. They can foreclose on it, but you don't have any money in it. So your risk is actually less. So that's kind of the disposition part of number three. So when you pull it together, it's really more about when you're building wealth. You're basically you're not building it like I'm very big on intentional wealth creation. So that means you're building it for a purpose. So, and that purpose starts with your vision. Then your vision is where do you see yourself? And then I start everyone at 10 years. I go out when I first set my goal to retire. I went out 30 years because I thought that's as long as I was going to live, basically. Now I go out. I believe God's going to let me live to 126. So I have a 70-year plan. And I've been on the last several years. So I'm looking at that far, right? So that's the plan. The vision is above that. Like, what am I to do in those 70 years? So when you look at your vision and then you identify my goals that are there, one of the areas of your goals would be financial. So that's the alignment of if you're going to build wealth, build it for a purpose. And then if you're on a very specific plan and you're around the right community and the right people, then it's actually less risky than what most people are in, which is a false sense of security. Most people think because I have a job, and I work for several Fortune 50 companies, when you have a job, you feel like it's less risk, but it's actually what we call a false sense of security. So it's really building wealth so that you can be financially secure, so that you can do it anywhere in the world, regardless of what you have. And when you do that, you're not dependent on you being able to work for the money, which is what's called earned income. So that's the way I would, connect the three triangles of like wealth building, and then goals, and then the third one, which I would probably put in the category of risk.
Yeah. No, I think that was a fantastic explanation, right? So, starting with vision, purpose starts with vision, and I feel like you reference without vision, the people perish. I truly, truly, truly feel like that. None of the great creations could have been made without vision, right? And and if we're referencing the Bible, when the creation story happened, he spoke and then it was created, but he had a vision first, right? We are made in his image, right? So I love that. I loved everything that you touched on in wealth building and goals and vision, and also risk tolerance. So one of the things that we talked about in the past, and you mentioned it briefly today, was the concept of the 4 asset classes. So if you don't mind, explain the concept of the 4 asset classes to building wealth.
Yeah. So the first thing is I want to kind of give my for clarity of like how I use the term, because now there's so with the information age that we're in, with social media, with the internet. If anyone Googles or internet searches like asset classes, you're going to get a list of 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 5 asset classes, right? So I want to be very specific to the way I learned it like a while back. because there's really four asset classes. And then I believe now it's being called the four asset classes in when we're talking about wealth creation, right? But they're really the four asset classes, right? So that's the way I learned it, right? So the first one, and this is not in the order; these are just the four, right? So the one that's most common is paper assets. So that's where most people will have stocks, mutual funds, retirement accounts are paper assets, CDs are paper assets. What that means is basically an asset that you're holding on paper. So that means you may not necessarily have the money, but it's basically on paper. That would be the balance sheet that we talked about earlier. That would be what that is, right? So that's paper assets. That's where most people have their money. And then the second one is where most people would aspire, which is basically, again, not in order, just a way to remember it is like most people want to have a business. And then for believers, they're really in, like Dr. Miles Monroe says, that he says, we're really built to move from employment to deployment. So because when you're employed, you're working for someone else's vision. So you're never going to reach your full potential. So you're there to deploy. That means to take your gifting that you were created for in order to serve it out. And then that's your actual, purpose in life. And that's to deploy out your gifting. So employment to deployment. But in the physical world that we live in, that would be in the category of business. So that's where you're a solopreneur, entrepreneur, you're business owner. Robert Kiyosaki calls it small business, big business. But it's basically an owner of a business. And the way I define it is clearly as an asset, not just like in the United States, a lot of people have LLCs. All they are pass-through entities. They just use it in order to receive a paycheck. And then it's not really a business, right? It's just on paper for protection. If you get sued, a lot of people use that for real estate, et cetera. But the second asset class is business. The third one is what everyone talks about because they see a lot of people make money there, which is real estate. So that's an asset class. And that's an asset class because assets are things that hold intrinsic value. And then the fourth one is called commodities. So commodities are basically our building blocks of our infrastructure. It's always used: gold, silver, oil. It's things that we use, that we have to use in the physical because everything's built upon them. So that's commodities. So then of course in today's world, many people will make a case of like crypto is an asset class, and then there's like NFTs. Someone will call something else an asset class. So in I guess like OG world, crypto and financial advisors, people that my friends that actually teach financial advisors, when we're talking about by definition, cryptocurrency, the problem is the advantage is the disadvantage. It's basically blockchain, but because there's no governing body that says here's what it's worth, it's based on the people's value. That's the advantage, but that's also the disadvantage. So that's why it's not considered, an asset class, because it's a matter of people's opinion on how much it's worth. Whereas the dollar in the United States is a dollar based because the government will buy it back for a dollar. So there's intrinsic value in it, right? So when you're looking at those four asset classes, the fastest path to at least your first million is going to be real estate. Business and real estate are the two asset classes that actually have the most advantages, especially in the United States as a capitalistic country. Paper assets where most people have it in, and you can use certain techniques, but you don't necessarily get all the advantages in paper assets. So it's a little bit slower, and your returns are a lot slower because you can't do some of the things you can do in real estate and business. You don't have the advantages in a capitalistic country. And then commodities, in my opinion, are just too slow, right? So when you're building wealth. Now, strategically, that's kind of where it's the question earlier about like preservation. So a lot of people, they either will build wealth in real estate, or they'll build it because they had favor in like business, IPO, initial public offering of a company they started, and then they will hold it in real estate, because real estate is such a solid, asset class. And then some people that aren't, particularly, confident about paper assets, which is the economy. Like right now, there's a lot of stuff about economies can go down. I think it's going to go up. So it's just a matter of like, what will it do? people, when it starts to get shaky, they'll take it out and put it into something more stable, which is really commodities. So, but when you're looking at the four, the fastest path is really real estate, because you don't need to know a lot. You just need to know the right pieces. You can leverage, you can do it with no money. You have a full amount of like increase in value, which is basically the balance sheet, with very little risk when you're doing that. And everyone has to live with a roof on their head, but not everyone has to have their own business. Not everyone has to have gold or silver or oil. Not everyone has to have brokerage account with mutual funds or stocks, but everyone has to have a roof over their head. So the only question is basically who's making the money. Right? So where's the money going? Going to your pocket, or is going to someone else that owns that building?
For sure. No, no, absolutely. So staying on the topic of real estate, so I just had a few questions here that will probably help quite a few people understand how this particular asset class works. So, how would you advise clients on leveraging real estate investments for wealth building?
So I see it as three stages, three components when you're investing in real estate. Well, and then before I say those three stages, the first clarification is I think there's also another misinterpretation of people that are real estate investors. So I see it's gotten more loosely used, especially the last couple of decades. I think people feel like if they own a property, then they are a real estate investor. And that's not what makes a real estate investor. So that just means you own a property. You're just a landlord. You're owner, a homeowner. You can have like 10 properties. It doesn't make you a real estate investor. A real estate investor is really looking at the numbers, and everything's intentional, and you're using real estate and you're acquiring it as an investor. So that's the first distinction. The second distinction is I think there's a bigger misconception that someone that's in real estate is a real estate agent, or in the United States, you have the designation of realtor, which is really just an association that says, we're going to do it under these rules that someone made up, and then now people pay to get that and get some additional training to do that. But that's the real estate side. As an investor, it's the other side of the piece of paper. So a real estate investor can be a real estate agent, but they don't have to be. A real estate agent, most of them are not investors. And the reason for that, and how you can tell typically, or how I tell, is that if someone's a real estate agent and they're still doing it full time, they basically have a job, is what they have. So most people that become an investor, you might keep your license to get the commission, but they usually will use other real estate people to actually do the transaction for them, even though they have the license, because the investor is really making money on the real estate. Real estate agent makes it off of the actual transaction. So it's not about the asset, it's about the income. So that's the second distinction. So then there's about three, I look at it as like three stages. So the first one is kind of going back to, I think, the logic of some of the questions you're asking about, like what do people do wrong, or what could they do better, right? So the first one's the front, the second one's in the middle, and then the third one is on the back end. So the first one is most people, as a real estate, when they're purchasing real estate, especially in the beginning, is they're doing it based off of what most people, what's most commonly used practice, and most commonly used practice and acquisition is basically the 80%. So and then I think, Sam, you and I were talking about this before we started here about like creative financing. So the key in the beginning is low risk, high gain, maximum gain, minimal risk, right? So, and how you do that is your return on investment, ROI, and how you do that and get the higher return on investment. Like in my movement, minimum is 50% the first 12 months. Whatever money you got into it, including renovations, anything else, if it's coming out of your pocket, you should be making 50% or greater. And then most people will make 1,000 or greater percent return first 12 months, right? So understanding how that works is more important. And that's the front end. So most people will come in with their money. So they're saving money in order to buy a property, investment or first home, doesn't really matter. The key is that they're not going into it with the intent or the vision that they can get it with no money. So that's the first thing, which increases your ROI. So that's the first thing, right? So is how people buy it is where the biggest mistake is made in the beginning. And you make money in real estate in the beginning. So when you
When you
on
buy.
purchase,
Yep.
the second stage would basically be survivability. And that survivability is for a short period of time in order to get enough equity in it. And then the third stage is really not the long haul, because the third stage is really when you have enough, you're just basically leveraging and you're taking it out. So basically, that's the concept behind it in real estate. And that means that you never really have to sell real estate. Let's keep borrowing it. And for some of you that are not maybe not in real estate but are in business, I heard Grant Cardone say this and describe it exactly the same way in business, which is exactly the way I learned it as well. Which is in business is very similar. The first one is that start a business with no money, just like buy real estate with no money. Just two different asset classes. The second one is you're trying to build up the valuation of the property or the business. And then the third one is once you have enough in there, then you're taking the money out of business. You're not selling it, right? So, but there's that's different from an exit strategy. So when you do that, then here's the practical aspect of that. So in business, that would be, raise money or start it and $1 million plus business, right? So get up to 10 million, borrow like about 5 to 6 million of that, start 3 more businesses with it. Real estate, exact same way. I just had one of our members last year actually take a property under their ownership. That means that they own the property, they own the title, no mortgage on it, and they made $700,000. As soon as they closed on that property, they actually had the signature on paper. They had immediate 3 offers for like more than $700,000 on it. There is no mortgage on that. So there's no mortgage, all right. So they actually acquired it with no money. They now renovate it. It's worth, we're guessing, I'm thinking it's going to be about 1.2 million right now. And that's with no money still. Full renovation, I think $150,000, $200,000, no money, right? So, and no private investors, no, like none of that. So they absolutely had all the money in cash that they could have actually done it, but I told them not to do it with any of their money, right? So they just made money on purchase, 700,000. Create another $500,000 off the exact same property with none of their money at all. And now we're about to get to that third stage, which is just we're going to take out about $800,000 on it, put it in their checking account. We use that to pick up a few more. So that's kind of how it would work in real estate under 3 stages.
No, that makes great sense, and it kind of brings us to segue into a topic that you were kind of talking about, but you didn't mention it specifically, which is creative finance. So just want to first break down what is creative finance, and then also talk about how are you utilizing creative finance with your students to acquire properties.
Yeah. So when I learned it under the infomercial Carlton Sheets in the early 90s. And so no money down program. It was a binder, I had cassette tapes. And that's how I picked it up. And then, of course, since then, I actually took a ton of just classes. It wasn't really in creative finance. It was just about real estate. And then Robert Allen is who we consider the godfather of creative financing. He was about a decade and a half before Carlton Sheets, at least from the timeline that I followed. And he just recently went online. He kind of disappeared for a few decades, but he's back online, but he's teaching a few other things. But so when we said creative financing, then it was a lot of different ways to buy property without your money. That's kind of what it is. In today's world, what's really fascinating to me, especially with now online, is everyone calls everything creative financing, but they're very specific one technique. Like I learned all the techniques, so I learned it like completely different. I can buy a house in 24 hours. Right? Before we closed at 5 o'clock, I could own a house today, right? So it's not that hard because I know all the techniques. But now there's very, very specific terms like Pace Morby's is now he's all over. He's kind of just went on TV show and he does what's called sub 2, and that really stands for, if you understand creative financing, it actually stands for subject to an existing mortgage. That's what sub 2 is. It's the sub two communities, what he calls it. But that's one very specific technique, which I actually didn't even learn it that way. I learned it as I call it informal assumption. So you're basically just taking over payments, right? So that's just one. So creative financing is very, it was different than what it is today. Today, that's probably everyone will say anything that's even traditional financing is creative financing. So now the way I'm doing it with my members is that I'm kind of separating, what I'm now calling creative acquisition and then creative financing techniques. So that so what we're building is basically like everyone's heard of this saying, give a man a fish, feed him for a day, teach a man how to fish, and feed him for life. That's where everyone stops. So what the Lord told me to do is that's too low of a level, right? So the level above that is teach people how to be fishermen. So that means that give a man for fish, feed him for a day. Everyone knows. Teach a man how to fish is basically that. If I would taught people how to do that in the United States, it's very different than if I'm teaching them in the UK. It's very different than like in Ethiopia. Very different from Australia. We're now in 26 countries because our intent is not to teach people how to fish in a pond or a lake or the Atlantic Ocean, Pacific Ocean. It's basically our vision is basically my vision that the Lord gave me was basically, teach people how to be fishermen. That means that every person here has the ability. For believers, that would be Deuteronomy 8:18. Everyone has the ability to get or create wealth. So we are the practical aspect of that. So that means that my job, my role, what God's asked me to do is help people understand the practical aspect of that so that get to your first $1 million, get rid of it, which seems ludicrous, right? So get rid of it and do it again, right? So, but this time when you do that, when you get to financial independence, it basically means that whatever you have today, you should be able to get rid of, sell off, give away, donate, put it in hiding, whatever you want to do. You tell your friends, and then close your eyes, spin the globe, put your finger down, wherever it lands, open your eyes, go there with nothing but the shirt on your back tomorrow, and then go from $0 to $1 million. Right. And that's our vision, right? So, and because of that, then we're teaching people it doesn't matter whatever I call it, right? So it matters like what is it that you're doing, and so that's the separation between them. So now I'm teaching it as creative acquisition, which is a program I'm doing that for 3 months right now with our members, and then there's creative financing techniques, which are basically now all the different ways that you can you can finance a property. The separation to me is that acquisition encompasses a lot of different pieces rather than just the money. Creative financing is specific to the money portion of it. So when we did that $700,000 deal with our member, one of our members, that had nothing to do with like a loan. So there's no financing in that. So that's more of how they acquired it, which is strategically very specific to how I did it with them. And so that's the difference between them. And then and what I'm trying to get people to understand is that don't get stuck on the actual technique. I can call it a whole lot of stuff. There's land trust, there's trust, there's, I call them informal assumptions. There's formal assumptions you can do with VA loans, but they're all, so don't get stuck on that because in this country, that's what they're called. In a different country, they're not even called that, right? So it's understand exactly what's happening, the base core concepts of picking up properties under the intent that you're not using any money and that you're going to, get a property that's going to grow in value significantly, like 6 figures at a time, year over year. And that's how you build wealth. And that's how we apply creative acquisition and creative financing techniques within the acquisition process so that people, can basically buy property even if you don't have a job.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and one of the things that we were talking on about before we jumped on, which was the strategy that we're utilizing, especially coming into this next chapter, which is utilizing creative finance and sticking a renter in there and paying it down for the next 5 years. But then you mentioned a caveat to no, don't just hold it for 5 years. I forget exactly what the term that you use, but just if you don't mind, just kind of just shining a little light on what I just shared.
Yeah, yeah. So when someone's building wealth, it's basically based on balance sheet, and kind of what we talked about on the beginning of this podcast. So it's about the balance sheet. So balance sheet is your assets minus your liabilities. So when someone is building wealth, you're basically picking up assets, but how to get the exponential curve, or when you start to really multiply money, is basically leverage, right? So now it doesn't matter which asset class you're in, because it's the concept is not dependent on the asset class. It's a principle of money. What we were talking about is that when you buy real estate, then you want to get to a point where you're just leveraging, you're just taking the money back out. And it's not that it's bad to take it out, but the way I equate it to our members is that it's the goose that lays the golden egg,
Correct.
right? So the goose is eventually going to die. And in real estate in the United States, the metrics for that is phantom depreciation, or it's basically the IRS rule that basically says you can depreciate your real estate property value over 27 and a half years. And so about then is when you have no depreciation anymore. And so when you do that, then most people would do a 1031 exchange. Okay, but the key is basically not to sell it, but to just leverage it. You want to take your money back out, because as soon as you sell it, just like when I think Sam, you and I were talking about like flipping. So the problem is that before someone retires, the biggest place that most people lose money is going to be, besides like squandering, it would be basically taxes. And then the biggest thing that I learned from like financial advisors that are putting people in the path that I'm trying to get them not to, is that when they're preserving the last period of the last season of their life, which is after retirement, they're basically getting taxed the heaviest. And so they're trying to get them to minimize that. And my whole thing is that, well, that only applies if you're kind of in that path of that 80%, right? So if you're not in that path, then it's not even relevant. But taxes is a big thing. So when you're flipping houses, you have what's called short-term capital gains in the United States. And then everywhere else in the world, it doesn't really matter what country you're in. When you sell an asset, you're getting taxed. So in real estate, you have an option in the United States called the 1031 exchange. It's an IRS code. That's where 1031 actually comes from. But it's an exchange, right? For like exchange. So people will roll in capital gains. But the whole concept of wealth creation and then the wealth triangle is that, why would you sell your goose that lays golden eggs, right? So you want to keep it, and then you just want to leverage. That means you want to take the value out. And very similar to the businesses again. Like I mentioned, was listening to some interviews with Grant Cardone, and he was interviewing billionaires, and he's talking about like how they all, basically borrow money, even though they have millions and millions and of course billions of dollars. They borrow money in order to start businesses, or they start with no money, and then they get to a certain point, then they take the money out and let the business continue to grow. Take the money out and use that to do what? Start more businesses, and then a lot of them will actually put the holdings into real estate, right? So very similar concept, right? And it's the concept that I teach is like leverage. That's all that is. So you're just taking the money back out basically from that, and then you're letting it grow. Now there's a little bit of trade with balance sheet versus income statement, which is the cash flow part. So that's a little bit more strategic, but that's the logic, because if you talk to anyone, and I've tested this for like 4 decades, right? I've talked to many people that used to own real estate, and again, very different in business than asset class in real estate. And there's been no exception. Like every person that's owned real estate, when I asked them, I was like, would you have kept it? They're like, yeah, the LA house that they couldn't get rid of, that was $100 and something $1,000 in the early 90s when real estate crashed. I think it was 94 when Orange County made some bad investments, real estate crashed, corrected, and then now it's worth like a couple $1 million. So that's why it's going to grow, because it's an asset. You want to take money out and leverage, and that's what you would normally do. Also in paper assets, same thing in business. And that's, Grant was talking about, that's one of their strategies that they use, Grant Cardone, and so they're easiest with real estate and business asset class. There's ways to do it in paper assets, and fairly hard in commodities, from that.
Yeah, so you mentioned a relatable story, but I was on the bad end of it, right? So you mentioned a property in LA and not being able to sell, but I was a flipper, right? And we purchased this property. I think it was about 235. We were selling it at about 365. We started a little bit higher. Now it was 365. We pretty much sold it to get rid of it, to get the money back out. I think we might have made like $7,000 each or whatever, right? Lost costs, right? Fast forward, I think it's about 6 years, and the only changes that happened was a new roof, and also someone dropped in a pool, right? And then we saw it sell in, I think it was 21 or end of 21, which is the height, for 865.
Mm-hmm.
And it blew our minds. And this was a 2-bedroom, right? And it blew my mind, right? And till this day, I will always say one of my biggest mistakes I made was just being a flipper and not holding to anything. But now I'm a holder. So you correct your mistakes. So that's kind of how that works. And so I got probably like about a couple more questions for you.
Yeah.
How do real estate developers and investors better structure their deals to maximize returns?
Easy answer. So we measure it based on ROI. So ROI is return on investment. So that means whatever money you have to put out in order to close on that property is how much money you have going in. And then my rule for my members is you want half of that back. That's a 50% return on investment in the first 12 months. And if you can't show that on paper, not speculation, if you can't show that on paper, then it's not a good enough deal, right? So, and that's a minimum requirement for my members. So now when we look at it from that perspective, the first thing people will say is that, oh, in real estate, well, that's easy if it appreciates. No, the first year you don't calculate appreciation because appreciation is speculative. So we don't want anything that's a guess with your money. So basically, when you buy a house, you're guessing on appreciation. One, because you haven't owned it, you're just doing research, or someone's giving you the research of their information. You're hoping that that's the case, but if you get the appreciation, that's icing on the cake. So it's basically the first year is the return on investment based on what you could get. That's usually rent, and then also how much you're paying out, and then how much you paid in. So what you paid in is not just your down payment; it's anything. That's your closing costs, title costs, attorney's costs. That's if you do renovations, if you do paint work, if you do replace carpets before you rent it, any maintenance that you do in a year, right? So that's all in. So when you do that, you want to return 50% or higher. So the key is basically putting the least amount down because your ROI goes up very significantly. And of course, you can see if someone puts 20% down on, say, a $350,000 house, at 70,000, you have to make 35,000 in 12 months. And that's a lot harder than if you put $1,000 down on a property and you only got to make 500 for the year to get 50%. So that's the mathematics behind it. And if someone follows that alone, then they already have a higher success rate, going forward. Now, after the first year, if you can do that, then that means in 2 years you get your money back, right? So now you're just keeping the asset that's continuing to grow. And so now in the second year, you can now make the assumption, even though we don't, that you've owned that property, so you know what it's appreciating as. But we still don't use that in ROI until you get your money back. And that's how you build wealth very, very quickly in real estate is exactly that. And of course, it only takes, if you buy it right, which is one of the things that I teach with our members, that if you buy it right, then what happens is that in a couple of years, you just need to hold it for like 2 to 3 years, and you're going to have 50, 100, 200,000, $250,000 in it. So then what do? Take it back out. right? So, and then you're not even going to use it to buy real estate. You're going to use it to set other assets, but it's there in case you needed to use it for real estate, which although also it goes back to like, you could also live off of some of that, not necessarily the way you want to do it, but if you did that, then, and you got to, it's something simple, right? So like if you got one house that does like an average of 10%, right? I think Arizona, we do about like 12-15%. Some places, some states in the United States, it's like 3 to 5%. Let's just say, and in most cases are about 8 to 12. So let's just say 10%. $350,000 house, that's 35,000 a year in value, right? So if you had 10 of those every year, your portfolio, which is your balance sheet, goes up by 350,000, a year. So if you had half of that, then every year that's 175. So it doesn't really matter. If you have a few properties, your portfolio is going to go up probably more than what someone's trying to make money in a job. But the key is understanding how to get it back out. Because again, it's not as simple as that, but the process is very simple conceptually, which is what you want to do. And as long as you're learning how to do that, which is leverage, then why would you ever sell the property? I mean, think about it. If like your portfolio is going by $1 million a year and you only need to live off of 100,000, it's still, multiplying faster and it's a compounding growth.
Yep. No, for sure. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. And my business partner, Brandon, always says everybody should own 10 properties like that. Which makes perfect sense with what you're describing now. Right. So, what are some of your favorite tax saving strategies? Because taxes is a big deal when people are acquiring assets. Obviously, in real estate provides one of the best vehicles for depreciation. So what would you say are your favorite tax saving strategies?
Yeah, it's just funny that you asked that question. So I have so our movement's called Wisdom, Wealth, Impact Makers, right? So it's 4 very specific words. You can interchange any of those 2 words, and that's our members, right? Wisdom, wealth. Wisdom is your wisdom, not someone else's. So even if you're reading the Bible, it's Solomon's got Proverbs and Ecclesiastes. So that's his wisdom, not necessarily ours, unless we do that. Unless we've had that experience. So wisdom, and then wealth, Deuteronomy 8:18. Impact, we're here to make an impact in everyone's lives. And then makers, creation, right? 1% create their future. So wisdom, wealth, impact makers. So every throughout the year, we have what I call seasons, right? So we just finished our winter season, which is also our financial season 1. And for 3 months, we cover a certain topic. So we just finished covering taxes last month. And so it's kind of interesting that you asked that. So in the biggest thing that I see that people really still don't really fully understand, so I've tried to go a little deeper with my members, is the concept of having your business pay your expenses. So it's a simple concept, but people aren't really fully understanding the depth of that. And so I want to kind of explain that because I think this is a big part of it. When you're doing taxes, and this does not matter what country you're in, the concepts are the same. The core principles will always reside as the base principles, the foundations. So when you are earning money, that means that money that you have made, then the government has the ability to tax that, right? So now they have the ability to tax businesses as well. But what we're trying to do is get deductions. That's what everyone talks about when talking about taxes. How do you get more deductions, right? And there's many ways to do it. In real estate in the United States, we have what's called phantom depreciation, or I call it that. It's basically, you depreciate a property over 27 and a half years. That means, $350,000 house that you buy, you divide it by 27 and a half. And that means every year, which I don't know what that math comes out to be, like $5,000-$6,000, is basically that's the amount that you get to write off as if you spent it, but you didn't. You didn't spend it, right? So you just bought a property. So you can buy 10 houses, and then you're now, writing off like $50,000 a year, that you never really spent. That's called phantom depreciation. So and that resides in the U.S. Now, but see, that's still a deduction. So that's not as big as an expense in a business, because in a business, If you have a business, you're the owner, you're the president, and so you have discretion of how you spend the money. Now, I'm going to give a couple examples so that people can understand a deeper part of this, because it's not what everyone thinks, right? So, if you're talking about like something like a vacation, right? So as an expense, you can't write that off. There's no deduction for that. And then the surface level of that is basically more of what people talk about. And that surface is that, oh, I'm going to make it a business travel. So now you got to justify it, right? It's a business travel. But when you're looking at it as a business, then how you spend your money in a business, the IRS or the government, they don't care. They're not there to criticize how you're running the business. They're there to understand what was the profit in both balance sheet, increase in wealth. Like some countries I found that has wealth tax, but that's valuation, and then there's like profit based on like how much did the company make. So expenses are treated differently than deductions. So that means that when you can understand that from a deeper concept, then any travel can be that. Like I'm a real estate professional, right? I just went to New York. That's absolutely a business expense for me because I've owned properties in multiple states. So it doesn't really matter where I go. I'm always looking at real estate, right? Now, is that wise for my money or not? Doesn't really matter, right? It's my choice. So now when we get to compensation, it kind of goes the same way. So if it's a deduction is different than an expense. So compensation we think of as salary. So now we're going in there's ways to do like S corp election with an LLC in the United States. So you basically get less Social Security tax. There's a lot of these different techniques, right? But when you think of it as compensation, then you go, well, would my company pay for my vehicle, right? Then go ask the president. Go into your office, in the small room that's called the bathroom in your house. Look into, in front of the president and ask him,
I've had that conversation before.
Yeah, and ask him, like, will you reimburse my car? Will you give me that as part of my compensation, right? What else can be included? Like we talk about insurance and all that, but no, you include pretty much anything, right? Because I'm going to decide, Sam, I'm going to hire you for my company. And because of that, I'm going to give you a laptop. I'm going to pay for your travel. I can do anything I want, right? That's part of your compensation. You're going to be, I'm going to consider you a sales position. So once a year, we're going to go to the Bahamas, right? All expenses paid, right? I decide to do that because that's part of your compensation, right? You want a phone? I'm going to buy you a phone every 2 years, right? There's no justification of deduction. On the personal side, you have to justify, is that a business expense for the phone or is it not? So it's very different treatment. And so when you think of it that way, now you got car washes. Now you got, what about a TV? I go to my dentist, my kid's orthodontist and my kid's dentist office, and they have PlayStations. They have TVs for the kids, right? Well, that's a business expense. Right. So from that standpoint, so what would make that different than if I got a TV and my kids, that work for me, by the way, I need them to do this during, a certain time. Right. So it's understanding it from a deeper level. It really builds there's a lot of things that can be part of the business expense legitimately, but that's not what's being audited in an audit. What's being audited is that it's not whether it's a legitimate expense or not. It's not, it's more of is it a legitimate expense deduction versus they're not going in and say, how did you run your business? We're not auditing your business, from that standpoint. That's the biggest thing. And that's gigantic. I mean, it's really gigantic, a couple other ones, right? Like toilet paper, bandage, coffee. I had this conversation with my members, right? Coffee, right? How many places have people gone to and then they serve coffee? I mean, almost any office I've been to serves coffee, right? Well, you write that off, right? So it's not a deduction. Is it an expense to the business? Two different questions. So I think that's the biggest non-use of, legitimate viewpoint of taxes, and it's legitimate.
No, that sounds that sounds incredible. Before we get out of here, we always want to end with, lessons learned, right? And it sounds like you've picked up quite a few. I'm not even familiar with what the lesson that you dropped on us last time, but what is your best lessons learned when it comes to building wealth?
Yeah, I think that the biggest lesson learned for me is that, and I'll go past and then present. So in the past, it had to do with, um, when you're pushed against the corner, like we're literally built to survive, and so you're pushing the corner is where you're going to rise the most, right? So don't let the world dictate that in a layoff, divorce, being a widow. Don't let the world dictate that. Just put yourself in it and then just rise on your occasion, right? And that means today, like every person can do that, right? So, and I learned that longer than I wanted to, but it took me only a few years to get to my first $1 million, and that's after going broke, right? So and that's because I set goals, and that's where I got to goal setting. The way that's kind of evolved now is, biblically, it's Deuteronomy 8:18, which basically means every person has the ability, to get or create wealth, to confirm the covenant, right, that the Lord has made with Abraham. And so because of that, the practical aspect is that you can actually do that if you understand it's not about the money, it's about resources and controlling and having dominion over the resources over the world. Now, does that mean it's going to be easy? No, but that's exactly it. As long as you believe that it's going to be easy, it actually starts to work in your favor. And then in the what I'll call the secular world, the people that maybe are not reading the Bible, they're not believers, then, or not Christian, then that's what they call like manifestation. So it's all in a similar concept, right? So it depends on like the source is really the only difference. But of course, as a believer, it's God gave us that ability. But people have done that centuries and centuries and centuries, that basically have gone from nothing. And again, U.S. is a really great example, because many people were broke or came here as immigrants, that are multimillionaires. And again, $1 million is not a lot of money. And so, but that is the lesson that I learned. It's the lesson that now I understand to be Deuteronomy 8:18. And my encouragement to every single person is that just believe that you do. And what would that look like? Live as if you are, and do the things that would allow you to receive it at that, with whatever you're envisioning, which will go back to vision. And if you do that, then when we're talking about finance or wealth, then create that wealth. Start today with what you have. And you don't need to have a lot of money. You don't need to have an education. You don't need that. You just have to have that belief first, and then you got to take the action to do it.
No, that's amazing. It all starts with vision, uh, doing the work, to get to the place that where wealth is created. So, how can people find you if they wanted to find you and work with you?
Yeah, if they can look me up on Facebook, I have a page, and then I also have a profile page with my name, Donald. J is my middle initial, and then my last name is DY. It's pronounced D. And when if you look me up, you'll see one of my page, and you'll also see my profile. Just follow me on there. We're getting ready to launch our once a year program. It's called the Experience. It's basically the journey to your first 7 figures, and it's a 3-month experience. I teach for 2 months, and then I'm bonusing people this year 30 days in our mastermind, so they'll get that as part of it as well. But I only open the doors once a year, and we're going to officially open it for 4 days in about a month and a half, 2 months from now, before we do it. And then once we close the doors, then people have to wait another year. But it's basically the 7 stages, and we talk about the first 5 stages of what does it take to basically get to your first $1 million. What does that journey look like? And I call it the journey to seven figures. And so just look me up on Facebook, Donald, middle initial J, last name spelled DY. And then just follow me on there and you'll see me go live. I'll be going live every day on there. And then promoting the opening of this program that we have coming up this year.
All right, sounds good. Thank you. Thanks again for blessing us with your knowledge and also a fellow believer and rooted in Scripture and everything that he brings to the table. So I'm grateful to have you on here again. So
yeah, you just, if I can just say, like, you do an excellent job of like remembering some of these we talked about last time, but really just inquisitively asking great questions that people can learn from, not only from me but your other people that you've been interviewing. It's been just a privilege to watch you interview people and get nuggets from every single person that you've interviewed. So great job.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you for joining the Pro Design Builder. It's not just about building a vision, a business. It's about building a vision and a life by design. Have a good day.